Hi everybody, I'm Bill Whittle and this is the Firewall. This tidy little structure was by all accounts the community anchor of a safe, friendly, booming little corner of muscular, dynamic Motor City, USA. Detroit, the crown jewel in the arsenal of democracy where cars and trucks and later tanks and planes rolled off of assembly lines manned by workers who lived across the street or down the road from little libraries like this one. This is the interior of that same library, the Mark Twain Library, as it looked in the early 1940s. Airy, ordered, quiet, and spotlessly clean. This is the interior of the Mark Twain Library in 2011. For decades, the librarians and the public complained about the deterioration of the library, and for decades, the Detroit municipal government allocated funds for its repair. And for decades, those funds somehow never arrived at the Mark Twain Library, but mold did, and trespassers and looters, and just before they tore it down, pretty much everything of any value had been stolen. Furniture, light fixtures, the copper wire from the walls. The only thing they didn't steal were the books. Now, author John Perazzo has compiled a remarkable booklet called The New Shame of the Cities, which contains an exhaustive, amazing, and depressing army of statistics that outline the Detroit pattern that has killed those American cities, ruled by unbroken lines of Democrats and Democratic Party policy. So, if we want to understand the Detroit pattern, maybe we should start in Detroit. Now, throughout the 1940s, 50s, and into the 60s, Detroit was not the blasted ruin you see today, but the thriving, pulsating center of American business enterprise. By 1960, Detroit had the highest per capita income of any city in the United States. Factories were humming, Motown Records was spinning out blues and soul, and Detroit's school system, called by the New Republic one of the finest in the world, was turning out world-class students of every race. Up until 1960, Detroit could boast a large and prosperous black middle class, black congressmen, and the wages for unskilled workers were higher than the national average. 1960 was the last year that Detroit had a Republican mayor. So what happened? Well, the first of the current Democratic dynasty, white liberal Jerome Kavanaugh, greatly expanded the role of city government in the city's business and, to his credit, made a serious effort to appoint blacks to prominent positions in his administration. But this was just preamble. The wave that eventually destroyed Detroit and so many other American cities came from Washington, D.C., and Democratic President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society and War on Poverty programs. $490 million in federal money, that is an enormous sum in the mid-60s, poured in through the Model City program, went to housing projects and social programs dispersed by City Hall, and not to help small businesses and entrepreneurs keep the city economically viable. By 1990, Detroit's Model City area had lost 63% of its population, 45% of its housing units, and were unimaginably violent and dangerous. 34% of Detroit's citizens were on the welfare rolls by 1987. That's 4 times what it was just 20 years earlier. A sociologist, Walter E. Williams, looked out over the financial ruin of Detroit and said, "The welfare state has done to black Americans what slavery couldn't do, what Jim Crow couldn't do, what the harshest racism couldn't do, and that is to destroy the black family." Now, in 1976, the Democratic mayor cut the police force by 20%. By 1987, the homicide rate was 3 times higher than it had been 20 years earlier. When locals complained about the skyrocketing crime, the mayor openly stated that calls for law and order were simply code words for white racism. So, where did all of the money for law enforcement go? Well, it went into the same pockets that the money for education went. Today, the Detroit public school system spends $15,500 per student per year. That's half again more than the national average. It's not that there wasn't enough money, it's where the money went. Well, in 2009, forensic accountants discovered 257 ghost employees on the payroll. Another 500 people were illegally drawing millions of dollars in benefits from the public school fund. And after a few months of this, 7 additional public officials were charged with felony embezzlement, having pulled tens of thousands of dollars from the school system. In 2009, Detroit's children had math scores lower than any ever recorded in the history of the city. and they now read at a level 73% below the national average. 1 in 5 fourth graders can write with fourth grade proficiency. Economically, 55 years of Democratic corruption in Detroit means the city now has the highest property tax rates in America, and yet, in 2012, city revenues were 40% lower in constant dollars than they were in 1962. In terms of economic freedom, the ability to start new businesses without acres of government red tape, Detroit ranks 345th out of 384 regions measured. When facing this ocean of fees and regulations, most people trying to start new businesses simply give up. Their dreams just die. What never dies, of course, is the city's vast bureaucracy, with 40-some individual labor unions, each with high salaries and lavish retirement benefits. Their schools are the worst in the country, and their murder rate is either first or second, but Detroit can proudly state that fully 1/3 of all of the money that it spends every single year is paid to some 21,000 public sector retirees and their families. This is what 55 years of death by Democrats has done to Detroit. 9/11 police calls average 58 minutes response time. The national average is 11 minutes. There are 12,000 fires every year in Detroit. Fire department money goes the way of the Twain Library repairs. Half of the city parks have closed due to lack of funds since 2008. About 100,000 housing units, that's nearly 30% of the city, are just lying vacant. And 40% of the people of Detroit hope to escape the Detroit pattern of Democratic destruction within 5 years. They just want to get out. And it's precisely the same pattern for other major cities like Baltimore. Now, by the end of the 1990s, the murder rate in Baltimore was 6 times higher than in New York. In Baltimore, Maryland, some 54,000 open arrest warrants, including 250 for murder or attempted murder, are being worked by 4 police officers. 4. In 2010, Democratic Mayor Sheila Dixon was convicted of embezzlement and perjury. 14% of the city's fourth graders can read proficiently. The Baltimore Teachers Union successfully opposed a desperate plea from city residents for a voucher program to allow them to find schools that would, actually educate their children. The $15,483 per student per year is paid to abysmal union teachers, then paid via union dues directly into the Democratic Party to run candidates that keep the heist in motion. That's how it's done. It's also how it's done in Washington, D.C., where by 1992, 52,000 people, that's 1 in 12, were on the city payroll. Los Angeles is 5 times the size of D.C., but it has 14,000 fewer taxpayer-funded workers. Washington, D.C. has an unbroken succession of Democratic mayors and city councils for the last 43 years. Like Detroit and Baltimore, Washington, D.C. constantly vies for the title of the nation's murder capital when Democrat Marion Barry, videotaped by the FBI and shown smoking crack cocaine on national television, was tried for 14 counts of cocaine possession. He called the prosecution a political lynching. NAACP Executive Director Benjamin Hook said that overzealous, hostile, if not openly racist, district and U.S. attorneys will bring a black official to trial on the flimsiest of evidence. 10 blacks and 2 whites found him guilty of 1 count of possession. A few years later, he ran again as mayor and was handily elected. 83% of D.C. 8th graders cannot read proficiently. 83%. But in 2011, with a deficit of $400 million, D.C. taxpayers were making lease payments on 2 luxury automobiles, around $2,000 per car per month, for Council Chairman Kwame Brown. Why 2 cars? Well, Brown had asked for a fully loaded, extended wheelbase Lincoln Navigator with a black interior. When the car came with a gray interior, he ordered the second vehicle at city expense and had D.C. school children pay the additional $1,500 for expedited shipping. I could do this all day, but I can't bear it anymore. Here's a list of failed cities, and beside them, the number of years of uninterrupted Democratic control. It's not that these officials are corrupt because they're Democrats or because they're black. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying they get away with it because they're Democrats or because they're black. And while civil servants pay the expedited shipping on their second Lincoln Navigators, the overwhelmingly black kids keep failing in school and killing each other by the thousands, and their overwhelmingly black mothers and fathers keep electing the overwhelmingly black liars, thieves, and con artists who fail to protect them and who pocket the money for the jobs and the schools that would set them free. And by continuing to elect these heartless, greedy, democratic swindlers, the prisoners of these cities are inflicting upon themselves the most shameful injustice to befall Black America since slavery. We need your help to keep these messages coming. If you want to help us make a difference, please go to billwhittle.com and become a member.